Yeah, well, I actually hate the word urban design. It's one of those, it's like sustainability, which is really worries me. You know, my urban design experience started about late 1939 when I was conceived on a fire escape at a private school. They had to give me up to my parents, and I'm really glad of that because it put us in a different part of Christchurch, which was great. And for the first 2 years of my life, which I don't remember at all, was in Sydney. And then they decided to upgrade to a street called Penrith Avenue off Strickland Street. And I think even from that time, I sort of worried about what was actually happening. It was a great time of our lives. But Mum, who was a very gregarious sort of person, always made friends with someone who were close to us, and Dad would have to go out and cut a gate in the fence so that Mum could liaise with that woman. And then a few months later, he'd have to nail up the fence again because she'd made a friend with the woman on the other side or someone over the back. So we were continually being closed down and opened out, you know. And the crisis came when I was about 10, and Brian Eyre across the road said he'd show us his sister with no clothes on and showing the magic lantern on it. And we thought, God, we were into real trouble, so we played cricket in Strickland Park, and the neighbourhood posse came around, and they found us at 1 o'clock the next morning still playing cricket in the park. And then my parents said, we're moving, and I thought, you know, I'd sinned incredibly, and we moved to a place in Beckenham around the river, which was a real estate agent said, it's you're moving Mrs. Athfield to a home. You know, you only have a house before, but this is a home. And Mum always used to talk about, I'd start asking questions. I'd say, what's the big front yards for? Because we never play on them. She said, that's for street widening, you know, and we had the media, you know, we had a great street anyway, but she was determined they were going to widen the street when more cars came along. And everyone had to have a 3-metre setback at each side, so you could put the cars at the back so no one would see them. But we never had a car until 1945, so that was quite interesting. So we used to use the pathway for kart races. You know, there was a bit of slope at the bottom, you could injure yourself, which was quite helpful. And then this real estate agent came along, and she had a French roll. And Mum didn't like it, but Dad thought she was really beautiful. You know. She sold us this house, and Mum said, that Mrs. So-and-so, I won't say the name, is a murderer. And my dad said, no, she isn't. A beautiful woman like that wouldn't murder anyone. And she'd actually thrown in a 1-bar heater into the bath where her mother was. And she got off, you know, because the woman got off at that time for criminal uses. And then later on, she threw the handbills of her husband out the window and put another 1-bar heater under the bed and set fire to him. And she finally got in prison for that. It was Mum's greatest sort of claim to fame. So, you know, I mean, I've always thought, you know, that suburbia was a very, very interesting place to actually see the opposites of those incredible controls which I had no idea about, and those responses which you saw relatively quickly. Because the other thing was the Hume Parker case, you know, which I always was quite fascinated. And the word lesbian was mentioned in 1953, and my dad said, oh, Mum said, what's lesbian, Dad? He said, it's homo. And no woman can be a homo. Anyway, the woman next door, which Mum befriended, used to clean the chimney, you know, and she was rather large, and she was on the roof cleaning the chimney one day, and the wind blew up, and she had rather hairy legs, and Dad changed his mind. He said, I believe the woman could be homo. And I often think about that sort of reaction between people, because, you know, as I got sort of older, you know, I met a lot of people. My parents were sort of gregarious. But I always thought about suburbia. And when I came to Wellington, we looked around, and I decided that I was going to be an architect to get some work, and so I built a house which people would notice, and it was the worst thing I ever did because, we got absolutely no work from it, and we had the most dreadful neighbours. And the sort of things that happened, and fairly soon after we started in the office, the people became more and more aggressive because we were working as an office in a suburban area. But once you actually got into their house, we had a young lad who was very handsome, and he went to the woman's house next door and knocked on the door. And she was vacuum cleaning in her underwear, and she invited him in. And so he actually had to sit there in front of her, having a cup of tea on a couch while she helped the vacuum cleaner in her underwear. So, I kept thinking, well, this is our biggest challenge. We actually have to break down these barriers of the suburban life. And then, we were fortunate in actually winning a couple of competitions and being a bit renegade. And I went to a couple of conferences in Australia, and one of the questions posed, what do we do with suburbia? And they had a whole thing done by architects. And every time they looked at suburbia, they bulldozed it, And I built some imagery which actually had nothing to do with the suburbia that I knew, which was about sometimes design context, sometimes by accident. But you actually started to realise that if we don't conquer suburbia, we haven't conquered the big challenge which has been placed on us. And these rules have controlled us so much in our lives that we do actually have to create a society where we meet each other by accident. We do actually have to create a place where the custodians of the edges are strong. And, suburbia, it only takes some gentle tweaks to change it. But the big challenge to us, if we are talking about urban design, which I don't believe is the language of an architect or a landscaper or anywhere else, it's the people's language. It's about that space which they're now starting to understand and appreciate. They don't carry the language. We really actually have to look at changing the way that suburbia works, taking down those fences, playing with the spaces in between, enabling people to actually have houses for solo people, allowing people of the same sex to live together and be accepted. And I think that's our biggest challenge. And we talk about urban design, but as John said, it's about rural design as well. And it's about the spaces we see. It's about the place which you actually put a road through the hills. It's about how far you locate your rural house from the road. We have a country which is covered with margarine cowpacks, which are houses, and a winding road off the main road to get to them. It's like snakes and ladders, and we don't have a beautifully clean, green countryside. We are destroying it all. Suburbia, I think, is the place to actually start.
So if we can understand Amritsar Street as a reaction against suburbia and Marjoribank Street flats a reaction against suburbia, it's still a long way to the waterfront and Civic Square. So how did your interest in those central city spaces emerge? I think Civic Square for me is really important in sort of putting even if we don't use the term urban design, the idea of urban design into the public psyche, the public thinking about the potential for cities to be improved through design.
Well, it's an unfinished exercise because I don't think the Civic Square works as well as it should. We were very, very lucky that Morris Tebbs, who headed Stevenson and Turner, worked with Fletcher's to develop a new centre for the city, and it got bigger than they could actually handle. So Fletcher's had offered the city $50 million for the circus up on the corner to build an office building, and in turn Fletcher's would build the rest of the facilities on the square. So Morris thought, well, the best way to do this is to get a couple of people on board with them, and we'd do it jointly together. And the city accepted that, which was great. There was Gordon Molyneux, Morris Tibbs and myself. And probably because we had less work than the others, we spent a little bit more time on the preliminary work, but I have to say that at one time we were sort of virtually chucked out by the city planning because we decided that at that time they had waterfront watch had been, not waterfront watch, the waterfront area had been designed by Paper Chase, I think was the firm, and they had decided that they'd have a really big piazza from the civic centre, which was just an initial form, across to the harbour to get people to move from the city to the harbour, and then they could get commercial uses. So we decided that we'd build the whole of the civic centre on this piazza, and it was a series of incrustations, and the city planner here just lost the school completely, and he said, if you don't change the design, I'm going to leave and you're fired, type of thing. So it was a much easier exercise after that, and we came back on the streets and talked a lot with Clarence Asen, who was very, very helpful in the whole exercise. But I still regret that the circus site was never developed, and with an activity which actually would bring people into the City Square and sort of change the thing from something which is slightly inward looking, that people would move from the outward streets through it, and I suppose, a hotel or something like that will still work on that sort of site. So the enclosure and the ability to bring people through the ground floor is still very important. And as we spent most of the time, most of the time probably drinking and joking, we finished up with the biggest lot, and Morris did the MOB, which is the round building, and we did the library and the underground work, the square and Capital Place. And Graeme McIndoe finished up with the main building, and Works finished up with the town hall. So it was one of those lucky sort of commissions which you somehow get brought into by default.
Is it still possible that corner site will be built on? Is it council owned, or the Fletchers end up owning it? No,
the Fletchers then finally offered the council at the end of the exercise, because we're going through a rough economic time, 25 million, and the councillors turned that down. And then it was finally valued at 6.7 million. So it's amazing that, that in those high-headednistic times of inflation, how quickly values can change. So that was a really interesting exercise.
There was maybe still is a proposal for the universities to put New Zealand School of Music on the site, which would have been good, because it would have connected, taken the works through ground level up to the square, would have taken links off from the bridge, and would have had music performance demands to perform in public space, and it would have been a recital hall, and so it would have brought the public in, there would have been students and things happening out. So, it's different from a hotel, but it would have had the same effect of activation, I think. Well, for me, the challenge with a civic precinct is everything's civic, and it's all good, like the art gallery room, the library, the council offices, that's all good. However, it doesn't necessarily have, there's not a lack of diversity of activity, and sometimes you need some other things brought in, which a hotel would do. Some parts of retail like that as well. Retail's been tried here, but it didn't really work. For probably a reason, probably the difficulty of access. Gatley on the corner of the square of Vera, I think it's called.